Yeah. Good. I think that we start then. There are a few points on the agenda. Milan, do you want to start first? It was with FPM and the website.
Yeah, let's start with that. So, I'm sorry, Jeremy, can you mute yourself? I have a lot of feedback.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, thanks. So, I'll just share my screen because, oh, Jeremy, can you let me share? That'll be useful for the second point as well. So while we're doing that, in short, I believe Sebastian implemented the Fortran docs for the developer documentation for. Okay, so let me. I still can't share.
Yeah, how should I?
So if you go down and I think right next to the share screen, there's a little arrow. Maybe there's in the menu bar, there'll be advanced options, something like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you should be able now.
Okay, very good.
Yeah.
Okay. Where were we? Okay, so yeah, but now we have FPM developer docs made by Ford. They're part of the CI, so every time we merge a PR, they're being regenerated. You can browse as usual, just like with stdlib. You can browse source files, modules, procedures, and so on. So currently, it's hosted at this kind of not odd looking, but considering that we have a fortranlang.org URL where the main website is, this is a bit odd now. So we have currently it's at this GitHub page's default URL as a subdomain. So you navigate to it using this URL. Originally, I thought, oh, we could do it just like we do for stdlib and point subdomain, say fpm.fortran-lang.org to this website, and that's how you'd access these developer docs. But then I thought perhaps it's better to reserve fpm.subdomain for a dedicated, pretty looking website for FPM, which I think FPM very much deserves, just like Cargo has it. So just want to get some feedback from everybody on what you think would be a good URL to use. We can just stay with this as we currently have it and make sure that we provide prominent link to it. So on the website, in the FPM README, again, these are not user docs, these are developer docs. So perhaps it's not crucial that they are like immediately visible or like Google search findable, but they should be easily reached by developers. So what do you all think?
How does stdlib do it?
stdlib does it. Let me show you. So Zoom thing hides my nav bar. Lib. So you see now it's stdlib developer docs, or actually these are really not developer docs, but this is the API of the stdlib. So they're also the user docs.
Okay, so I would do it exactly the same way. I would do fpm.fortran-lang.org, and then we can underneath that we can have a main website for FPM, and part of it can be a developer subsection, let's say.
Okay, Got it. Okay, so as of right now, we don't have a main website or a user-facing website. So for now, FPM subdomain can point to this developer page. Once we have a full website, this would be just a subcomponent.
Yep, I think that works.
Okay, anybody else? That sounds good to me too.
That's good for me also.
Yeah, I think Andre makes a good plan. I think that works.
All right, that was easy. And next point. So I'd like to discuss split. This is the Fortran 2020X split. I made a simple implementation. It's as far as I can tell, it does exactly as specified in the current standard draft, and with corrections that were passed here by Richard. So I'd like us to just quickly just look at it over, discuss the API a little bit, and sort of I'd like to get an overall support for proposing it to the STT-lib.
Yes. So can you open up the issue where we are discussing this, because there was quite a bit of discussion of the API, and I can't remember which issue it was at. It might have been the J3 Fortran repository.
That's in that's in issues. Okay, here we go.
I think that's the one. And if you scroll down, I think, yeah, okay, there you go. So there.
Yeah, so I had a few comments about it. So I'd like to discuss that. Maybe even easier if I just go to the actual code where we can see the interface, and then I'll discuss what I think about it.
Yes.
Okay. So after getting a little bit, maybe 5 to 10 minutes used to and rereading the standard draft, how it's defined. So I thought it was the API was a bit awkward, but it took me some getting used to, and then now I somewhat like it. But basically, there are 3 different forms. The first one is when you want to get tokens. So what split does is you pass it a string. Does this? It's how do you call that? I forget. It's an assumed size character, I believe, as an input argument, and you pass it a set. A set is also a character string, assumed size, which can contain any number of characters that are to be used as delimiters. So given that, it returns as an output argument tokens, which is an array of allocatable characters. Okay. Optionally, this first form also allows you to pass separator, which is an output argument. And this separator basically gives you an array of length 1 characters, which are the separators. So, for example, you can pass a chunk of text to the subroutine, and you can choose to separate by a comma, a space, a semicolon, for example. And then it will use any of these as delimiters. And then if you had passed the optional separator, then that would be an array of, where comma was a delimiter, that's what you're going to get there. So it also allows you to get information about what was the actual delimiter that delimited the tokens. So this is always size of tokens -1, I believe. So that's the first form. The second form is, and you may have noticed I have implemented this as 3 specific implementations, which are then aliased with a generic split. You could also handle this with by just parsing optional arguments. I thought this was just a simpler way to go about it, but I think it also well illustrates.
Milan, are you showing some code? Because I only see the issue.
Oh, gee, I'm sorry. Let me, my bad.
Sharing a window instead of sharing your whole screen, and so we don't see your.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. I'm glad you stopped me. Okay.
There we go. Yeah, you can see it.
This is what I was showing. So I spent some time talking about this interface, but now you can see it here. And these are the three specifics and the generic name. Now, what this also illustrates well is a part of this API that I don't like is that there are multiple functionalities packed into one name. So I'll get to that in a bit. So I'll move on to the second form, which is the split first last. And input arguments are the same, but the output arguments are integer arrays, first and last, which gives you indices of so position of the first letter of the token and the position of the last letter of the token. So as many tokens that you get out of a string, that's how many firsts and lasts you will have. So this allows you to get just the integers without getting all the character string tokens allocated in memory, and perhaps just pull out specific tokens by just using some elements of first and last. So in my simple implementation, actually, this first form calls the second form to get the first and last, and then it does the parsing of the string.
I have a quick question for the very first form. It's an intent out. So the tokens argument is intent out is allocatable and its character in Fortran. It doesn't mean the array each token has to have the same size, or can it be different size for it?
It has to have the same size. So
it's an issue.
Well, what you get is they're allocated with the length of the longest token. Okay. So if you have a 20 character long token and a bunch of other small tokens, all the small tokens will be padded by spaces.
Yeah, I think that's the limitation currently. The only other way would be to have a derived type there. So this might be,
yeah, but considering it's an array, that's really the only way to go about it. And I think that's fine as long as you're aware of this. Okay, so split first last, and I was gonna go to the third form. So what I call split pause is instead of tokens or first and last, you can pass it a pause or the position. So this is an intent in out integer. And what pause is you give it, you give a position, say 100. I'm gonna look for a token that follows immediately after the 100th element of a string. So that gives you a little bit more efficiency and like fine control if you want to extract the position of only one token that is after some position. The first character, the first index, the index of the first token that follows pause will be inserted into pause. So it updates its value in place. And then optional, if you pass a logical back, it does the same thing, just it goes from the back of the string. And then it looks for the token that's immediately before the pause. So this gives you a general idea about these three forms and that they're really three different functionalities packed under one name. And then the functionality is determined based on the arguments that you pass. it's not my favorite style, but once once I'm using and once I understand how it works, I'm okay with it. And personally, I'm most likely to use just the first form, which is to get the tokens. And another thing is, so these are all subroutines, and they work on either intent in out or intent out arrays. So you pass it an allocatable array of allocatable characters, and it allocates its memory and it updates the values. So it doesn't allow for, say, a more functional style of programming. Now there's pros and cons to each. This avoids one extra copy that you would have if split was defined as a function. But for convenience of programming, I have also included this function which I call string tokens, and I call it something different to clearly differentiate it from split. So string tokens is not part of the draft, the standard draft or the revision document, and it's just a function that calls the subroutine and returns the tokens as a function result. So this will make an extra copy, but for users who don't care about that, who are perhaps working with just parsing very short strings to extract a few tokens, this is something that you can get the result of and pass immediately as an argument to something else, if you'd like. So it allows for a little bit more functional programming style, if that's what you like. And for just for an example's sake, I had so the main program in this repo actually just reads I think it's about a 6 megabyte text file. It's the whole text of War and Peace, and it parses it 5 times with the split subroutine and with a split function. That's the string tokens function. I was really just curious, what's the approximate cost of using a function versus a subroutine, and it's about 20%. And I find that consistent between my multiple computers and multiple compilers.
But you have to compile it in release mode. You have to compile with optimizations on.
Yes, so we can try that. I'll do O3 because OFast actually segfaults.
And then you have to do -mark native also.
So it's a very similar similar result. Now I don't have many tests. I have only implemented the examples from the document itself, which basically parses short strings like this, and I just made sure that my results match those that are in the document. But obviously for the actual proposal to stdlib, we should have more tests here.
All right, so my comment is that I did not realize until now that I thought that the string, can you show up the signature of the string or split tokens, I think it's called. So I thought initially the split token, the split tokens will be the most useful version, because in Python, that's what I use all the time. It's very helpful. In fact, the string tokens, your version of that would be the most useful from like usability. But I did not realize that the string will be allocated for the the character length will be the longest token. And also, I guess for efficiency reasons, the split first and last might actually be possibly the fastest in terms of implementation, because I think it only allocates 2 integer arrays. Exactly. And it doesn't do any kind of string movement. And so if performance is important, the split first and last actually is also very useful for that. So I think I can see how both of them have their merits. And the last one, can you show the signature of the last one? The split pause. Yeah. How struggling a little bit with this one. How would you? When would you use this one?
So, good question. I couldn't think myself of some use cases. Maybe others can help, but this allows you to extract one. It really focuses on extracting one token because you pass a scalar pause, and it returns you the. Actually, it doesn't return, but it updates the value of this argument with the position of the first token that follows that position. So
I could potentially see it being useful in some sort of a state-based parser. Right, where you just try to parse one thing at a time, like walk through some sort of a string, like one token at a time. I could see it being useful in that kind of an instance, but I wouldn't see it being used very frequently.
But or can you know the end of the next token? So you get the start of the next token.
You'd have to call it again.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
You have to figure out where the start of the token you're interested in is, call it again to figure out where the start of the next one is, and your token is between those two. But the efficiency is in that you're not doing the whole thing at once.
Yeah, I can see.
So if you want to do expensive calculations in between or something, or I mean,
it looks like this is like a find function in Python, that it just gives you the first position and then you can yourself call it again, right?
I guess.
So, okay, so I changed my mind a little bit now after kind of discussing it. I think the first two APIs, the what is it called? Split
tokens, split first last.
Split tokens, and yeah, those I think are both very useful and have different use cases. The first one is the split tokens is helpful. It's like the easiest to use, but it might not be the most efficient because it needs to allocate a new array and allocate all those strings there and copy them. But from like a user, how to say, like usability, that might be the easiest to use, like the closest to Python, I should say. The other one, the split first and last, I think might be the most efficient because it in one sweep, it gives you all those positions and never copies any string. The last one, I'm a little bit struggling, to be honest. If I would maybe not call it split, but maybe a find, I would change it to the name to find almost.
Yeah, I agree. It does not splitting. It's finding.
Yeah, exactly.
But its uses if you're trying to do something that's really huge data. You're not going to want to split and get the giant arrays probably. So this allows you to kind of go one at a time.
Yeah.
But like you said, it's not splitting then, so it should have a different name. I had a couple of comments. The first is with regards to why it's not a function. You get the extra copy. I think somebody might have to correct me if I'm wrong on this. I think only if the only thing you're doing is assigning directly from the result. If you're in an expression, I don't think you get the extra copy.
Okay.
Right, because it just gets passed directly to whatever, so you don't have...
Right, and semantics are different for assignment, yeah.
Right, so that's why you get the extra copy, is because the semantics for assignment involve a copy. And then for the split tokens, I don't really like it being an allocatable character because they all have to be the same length and then they're padded with spaces. So if my set for the separators doesn't include a space, I can't know if my tokens included a space at the end.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. You're right.
Yep.
But if you're only going to be using the intrinsic types, then you don't have a choice. So
Actually, you're right. I think you just discovered the problem with that, because in Python I use very often comma as the delimiter, and so if you are, let's say the string that you are passing in is comma delimited, and so there are some spaces sometimes. Let's say CSV. Say you are parsing CSV file which is comma delimited, but space could be part of the token, the tokens. So the first API does not allow you to discover the space.
But why? I mean, the length of the string ends with the length, and it's the difference whether you use len trim or len.
No. Len trim removes all the spaces.
Yeah, but len trim not. Len not. The length includes it. You can have a string full of spaces if you use len. If you use len
right,
trim,
but they'll all be the same length. They'll all be the same length as the longest token. So if there's a token that's longer than all the rest of them, and one of my shorter tokens included spaces at the end, I can't tell anymore.
Well, that's if you're using this interface. If you use one with the positions, then you can figure it out.
That's true.
Okay, yeah, now I get it.
But then I wanted to be able to just get the strings and know that they're all the right length. But like I said, if you're using the intrinsic types, then you don't really have a choice, and you have to go the other way.
True.
Another thing I don't like, and is not common compared to other languages, I think the way set works here, which is a scalar character string, and then in a single string you put characters that you want to act as delimiters, and strtalk works as well, but that's not how most other languages work that I saw. So Python, MATLAB, Julia, they all
Python's works that way too. It bit me once before because I didn't expect it to when I was using it, and it works the same as this.
Okay, I looked at Python's stdlib docs, and I didn't see that. I'm just used to passing a single character as to split.
Yeah, but I agree that would be a useful use case where I want to pass a separator that is more than one character long.
Yeah, exactly. So here, if you pass a comma and a space as set, and you have a CSV file that has a comma space between elements, you're actually gonna get some empty tokens where you have a comma and a space, because this will return you an empty token in between those two.
Well, that would be actually pretty common in something like a CSV file.
It is common, yeah.
Yeah, and we keep running into various things because Fortran doesn't allow you to have ragged arrays. So unless we somehow add to the language the ability to have an array of character strings of different lengths, then I'm not sure there's really a lot of difference between this interface and having an array of single characters. This is the languages that I'm familiar with that have this functionality. You just give a string that has a series of the characters you want. I don't know Python, but other languages I've used do it that way. And otherwise, you have to create an array constructor, which is a little awkward.
Well, there's two ways that you might expect this to work, actually. If one where I get the empty tokens between the space and the comma, because those are both delimiters, or one where I don't get the empty tokens between delimiters. Like if I'm parsing a CSV file, I don't want the empty tokens.
Oh, you do? Absolutely.
You do.
Well, if I've got comma.
Yeah, that's
not if I've got comma space.
Well, but a CSV file won't have two different characters as the delimiter.
Yeah, I guess that's true. But
and Python gives you the empty tokens. It gives you a list of strings, and they can be empty.
Yeah, but in this case, if it's empty, you will not know that. from this with this API.
That's true.
It will have empty characters, or it will have space.
Yeah,
well,
if you have comma, space, comma, and you put in comma and space as the delimiters, you won't. What you'll end up with, you'll just end up with two empty tokens, right? One between the comma and the space, and one between the next the space and the next comma.
That's an unfortunately designed data.
Yeah, I mean, in that case, you probably want to pass only the comma, and then the space wasn't. I mean, you'll know that that it was either empty or it was a space.
It seems that if you care about the spaces, then I think you have to use the second API. That seems to be the first and last API. That should be very robust.
Yeah, and first and last clearly tell you which token is empty, because last is one less than first. Any other thoughts?
Well, I have a question for Steve. Do you think it makes sense to call the split pause to rename it to find?
No, well, no. To me, find is conceptually like index. I think split is a reasonable word for this function because you are taking a string and you are splitting it into tokens, and that's a common usage, language usage.
No, you might have misunderstood my question. I agree. Split is a great name for the function in this file that's called split pause and split first and last. Mila, can you go up a little bit so I can see can you go to the very top?
Yeah, so split first, last.
Split first and last and split tokens. So those should be called split. But my question is, the very last function is called split pause. And it seems, as we discussed, that functionally this is actually not splitting, but finding.
I'm actually curious, what is different between index and split pause?
That's also one of my main complaints about this split pause. The only difference that I see is that with set, you can have different separators, different delimiters, while with index you have only one. So, but for me they are quite similar, split pause and index.
Oh, now I see the difference. Index, it's going to find the exact substring, whereas split pause is going to find the first occurrence of any of the characters in the set.
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
So index set is instead of it being set, it's a whole thing. It's a substring.
Whole string.
Find this substring, whereas this is find any of these delimiters.
So maybe it should be renamed to find any or something like that. It seems it's not a split anymore.
Well, this name does not appear in the language, right? This is the Mila's implementation, and that's going to go in and maybe go into some library. You can call it anything you want.
Yeah, no. And the question is, so this is overloaded. The way Milan implemented it, it's overloaded, and so it's part of the split function, and it's determined based on the types of the number of the arguments, which of those will be called. And my question is, when you supply the arguments that in Milan's implementation would pick the split pause implementation, and NAG compiler can call it differently internally, but the idea is.
I wouldn't expect these names to be visible to the user, so it really doesn't matter.
I agree, but in terms of functionality,
yes,
does the functionality that this part of the feature exhibits, does it deserve to be its own name with a different name?
Yeah.
because conceptually it's no longer about splitting, it's about finding.
Interesting proposal to work out. Oh, you mean it, now I've got to remember, this is one of the possible meanings of the current split.
Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can't get excited about this. I mean, maybe a couple of years ago when this was put up, we might have thought about something, but I don't see it's worth wasting any cycles on separating out that into a different intrinsic. People will figure it out. That's my view.
Well, people will figure it out, but if we're designing a language, we should make it easier for people to figure out if we can.
Well, split pause is it's a little weird in that of the overlap with index.
Yeah. I would have been much more excited about all of this functionality if it actually included the ISO varying string that was proposed, years back, and that was actually going to be added to the language as actually having an intrinsic string type. But because this interface would work much nicer, you could actually have the different size strings as the tokens and all that stuff. But
the other point is, of course, really to consider if we say in instead of a single character. I mean, this index would be more consistent to all users. I mean, making index giving index the possibility to introduce more than one character would be an enhancement to the language that's much more consistent than putting it into the split.
Well, I mean, it's certainly possible what I would suggest here is to write a paper that says, this split pause is really kind of weird. Do we want to do it this way? Do we want to do it at all? Because it could be carved out and then perhaps developed as something else or dropped. Necessary. I agree that that split pause seems to be the least useful of the variations, but my experience of doing this sort of thing is maybe not as much as some of yours. I mean, I've done lots of parsing of splitting tokens out of strings in different languages, but I don't think I would have used something like this.
I mean, I would not even commenting on whether it is useful or not. That people have to decide. It's just from what I understood now. I mean, I should really read this in detail. It's unexpected that the split behaves like that. I'm not saying it's useful or not. It's just unexpected if two argument combinations of split actually do a split, and the third one is something you probably expect to be a more fancy index.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly my question. And it looks like I like what you said, Steve. So I think what we can do is so this was my understanding is this was passed by the committee to include into 20X, but maybe Steve can kind of expand on how the process works. But it seems if we write a paper and convince the J3 committee, the J3, let's say next meeting is J3. So if we can convince the J3 committee that the paper is good to be kind of, and let's say it passes, doesn't mean that it kind of, let's say the paper, I don't know exactly how we'll propose, but let's say we say, let's remove split pause and let's either just remove it or maybe enhance the index, let's say. And let's say the passes it, what happens?
Well, we've already modified split in 2139, and we can continue doing that through the process. I mean, the WG5 said we want something like split, this something like this procedure that was in ISO varying strings. J3, you go figure out what it's supposed to look like. We are, admittedly getting towards the end of the process, but it's not too late to make a change like this. I would much rather see us think about this before a ballot draft goes out. And I was there when Dan, who was the one who wrote the spec for Split, when he wrote it, and I remember being not really all that thrilled with it, but it's coming to me. But a paper that argues that split pause, that the split pause variant is a bit weird and not quite consistent with the other splits. The committee would be interested in talking about that, and so I would encourage somebody to write a paper and we'll talk about it in February. Actually, I'd like to talk about it before February. We talk about it in the J3 discussion board, and get the other J3 members and JOR to look at it.
Yes. Okay. So I think the plan is clear. Milan will write the paper. No, we'll help. We'll write the paper with Milan and others, right? And then we'll discuss before the meeting. I think a good workflow that I think works great is to get kind of pre-approval from the J3 committee members saying, this is good. I'll vote for that. And then once we meet, it will just kind of go quickly and they'll vote for it, hopefully. And if they say, if there are issues, we have time to resolve it before we meet.
Yeah, it's not pre-approval. I mean, we're trying to refine the definition, and the more discussion of that happens, the earlier it happens, the better. It's not, the approval would happen if then J3 says, yes, this is the way we want to do it, and we like this change. There's no pre-approval going on.
I know it's a double quote. What I mean is what I want to avoid is spending too much time on this at the next February meeting. Wasting hours discussing, right? And if we kind of pre-discuss it ahead of time and kind of get the committee on board, then when we meet, it will just go quickly.
We have to do it in advance. We cannot take the time at these virtual meetings, and February meeting will be virtual, and it's very likely that the June meeting will be virtual, to do this level of discussion. So it has to be done in advance, and earlier the better.
Perfect. Awesome. I think we are in 100% agreement, so that's awesome.
Okay. Good. So yeah, I think it's good.
Two questions on this. I'm sorry, Jeremy.
No problem.
Is the overall, at least for right now, the tentative consensus is let's propose to remove the split pause variant from split and propose to augment index with an optional set argument?
You can't do, no, the second one would be out of scope.
Okay.
You could think about that for 2Y, but not for 2X.
Got it. But say for 2Y, that would then be a separate.
Oh yeah, you could propose that for 2Y, sure.
Got it. Okay. And second question is, now as you all, I'm sure, recall, one of the key motivations for SDDlib was to a sandbox for intrinsics to be included in the future standards for people to experiment with them and even use them before they're implemented in compilers. What do we do with this one? We implement the one that's currently in the future standard draft as is, so including the split pause that has, I think, a pro and con. A pro in that it will allow more people to experiment with it and actually see why split pause may not be appropriate as part of it. And another one is people may start using it more, and then the language will get updated and say, oh, well, actually split is now a little bit different because it doesn't have the split pause variant. So what do we do?
my recommendation would be to put it into the experimental section of stdlib. In other words, the way we kind of decided to do it, just documenting that it's experimental. And then if the committee changes, let's say they decide we write the paper, they'll approve it and we'll remove split pause, we'll simply remove it from the experimental also. And then once the standard gets out, we can move it to stable.
All right, well, at some point, when this becomes an intrinsic in the language, you don't want it really in stdlib. Or you might just want that to somehow reference the intrinsic.
Yeah, in fact, we can have a section in stdlib that's called backwards compatible or something like that. If you use a compiler that doesn't support it yet.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, I agree.
Very good. I'm happy.
Good. Any other comments on this part? No. Perfect. Yeah, there were any other points that were mentioned. Are there any other business or someone that would like to share something?
Martin here, maybe a little bit on behalf of Ian. So he basically worked on this OS path library a lot, and especially for Windows. So I have implemented it for Linux, and I think it works on Mac OS. Someone tested it as far as I remember. And he now did on Windows using the Intel compiler and this Ming GW and the other one, CMing, whatever. They all behave a little bit different, which seems to make it quite difficult for him. And especially then combining that and testing that is a little bit difficult. But there's progress, and from time to time we work on this repository, and hopefully we have ready, sooner or later.
What does OS parse do?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So it's basically the implementation of the OS and OS parse from Python, so you can figure out whether something is a direct path, PATH. Sorry.
Got it. I know.
I think I presented it a while ago, but I mean, really to make it clean and tested on all different types of operating systems is requires simply some extra work, and I'm not doing this work. That's what Arjen is doing. He really did a lot of changes.
Is it for FPM or stdlib?
I mean, currently it's just a library that is on my GitHub, and we can certainly put it in stdlib. But I think you can also then install it via FPM if you want. I really don't care.
So, okay. So maybe what we can do, keep it as a separate library. We can make it an FPM installable library, and we can help you set up a CI to test it on Windows, Linux, and a Mac, and get some usage, out of it, and then we can propose it for stdlib later.
Yeah. So it was actually motivated by stdlib, and there was a long issue thread with a proposal for this.
And I think it was motivated by the use case of FPM was I think a big motivation of why he wanted to flesh out so many different environments. But I think with regards to like the CI and testing it, I think the biggest hiccup to supporting all of these things was not just that trying to run it on Windows. It was all the different environments you could run it in on Windows. Like Cygwin was so different from MinGW, was so different from CM, Windows command prompt was like they're all so different, but they're all the same operating system.
I think it can be all tested at the CI.
Can you test through a CI on Windows Cygwin, MinGW? I mean, if you can, then great. Let's do it. But
I think so.
I haven't tried to go down that rabbit hole yet.
I mean, I've done it. It's been like 5 years ago, but you just test it on Windows and you just install the Cygwin. It's typically pre-installed, I believe, on Fair at least it's pre-installed. So it's all the packages are installed. All you have to do is just run Cygwin and run it through Cygwin or run it through cmd.exe. It can be done, I think.
Okay, Andre, then I will contact you.
FPM
for testing.
So it is what I suggest. Milano will do the proposal. I'll help you with the CI. How about that?
Okay.
Yeah.
And can help Milan with the paper if you want some help.
Should be easy. I mean, we mostly figured it out.
Okay, good. Any other comments or the business? Quick one? No?
I just want to say thank you for discussing the split. I think we made really nice progress on that. And thank you, Milan, for implementing it. And it was very helpful for doing that.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Discussion was useful indeed. So I think that we can close the meeting. And thank you all, and we'll call all in 1 month then. Good.
Very good. Bye, everybody. Thank you, John.
Bye.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.